Hi everybody. I just wanted to share a quick verse with everybody this morning before we start, and that's Deuteronomy 31:6, and it says, "So be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not panic before them. For the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you." And in the context of that verse, the Israelites are about to be led across the Jordan River, and Moses says, well, I'm 120 years old, and he basically retires. And I can imagine that the Israelites would kind of be in like a freak out mode at that moment, and saying, who is going to lead us? How will we get across this river? And God says, don't worry, I will provide for you. And he sends Joshua just to get them across the river and to lead them. And I think that's just such a good reminder that God doesn't just leave us, with nothing. He provides for us and gives us the things that we need to be able to go through challenges and difficulties. So as you sing the next two songs this morning, just keep that verse in mind, and the fact that the Lord will never leave us and he will never forsake us. There's a grace when the heart is under fire, another wave when the walls are closing in. When I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. Turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. Turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. Turn it for good. 'Cause I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. 'Cause I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. One more time. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Dear Heavenly Father, thank you just so much just for the truths that are in these songs, and the fact that we are never alone, and the fact that you provided for the Israelites back in Deuteronomy, and you will continue to provide for us today, and you will never leave us alone. And that's such an awesome truth that we can hold on to and have hope for. So thank you so much, Lord, just for your constant provision, your love, and your grace. In your Son's name I pray. Amen.
Hi guys, this is part 2 of my chapel talk for Relationship Emphasis Week, Passionate Pursuit of Distinction. On Thursday, I talked a little bit about what helps you begin to develop the passionate pursuit of distinction in your life. I talked about what sort of things make you interesting, how you spend your time. So I'd encourage you to go back and check out that video if you haven't seen it yet. It will give you some context for what's going to be in this video. And in my talk on Thursday, I left off with this slide. What do you have to show for yourself? And really, I wanted this to be kind of a thought-provoking end to the first part, really where you begin to step back and take some inventory on what is going on in your life right now. Have you been devoting enough time to yourself? Because my guess is that many of us have more time now than what we have. And my hope with this talk today is to begin to have a conversation about ways in which you could use your time to better develop your sense of self, to help it be more in line with who God created you to be. So the first part of that is beginning to develop a passion. When we look at a passionate pursuit of distinction in your life, really becoming that interesting person that God has created you to be, there's a few things that you have to consider. First, you have to devote the time. Prior to the pandemic here, one of my goals of this talk was to really try to encourage you to find ways to create more time in your life. Well, many of you have that now, or at least you have a slightly less complicated life where your focus has been focused in on very specific things. But in order to develop a passion in your life, something new where it's a place where you can kind of pour your energy and your interest, and that it in turn can help you develop your interest and become interesting, is spending intentional time doing something. There's some things we know in psychology about spending time doing something that helps you to like it more. It's called the justification of effort. Basically, the more that you spend time doing something, the more apt you are to like that or enjoy that. And it's part of why the longer you work at a job and the more that you learn about an area, the more you would defend that area or protect it because you've invested yourself in that. And so in order to develop a passion, part of what it takes is actually setting aside the time to do something. And I would love to say we have a culture where people do this on a regular basis, but the reality is most passions tend to be developed after other things have occurred. So you kind of try to squeeze time in for something that's interesting to you after you've done all the kind of necessary things. It's not always looked at as a necessary sort of pursuit. And so my encouragement to you would be schedule your passions. Schedule the development of a passion. Find time where you can actually carve out in your schedule and say, 2:00 on Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to pull up a YouTube video, pull out my guitar, and I'm going to learn a song and begin to have intentional drive towards setting aside time to develop something. And part of it is you have to take time to explore passions, to explore interest. And I think we often feel that eventually some interests will just come along and hit us in the face, when in reality, we need to pour ourselves into something and see if it fits well. To explore it, to try it on, to go deep enough into a passion to see, does this align with who God's created me to be? The second thing is to find a flow. And this is one of those things from when I teach in social psychology and I teach about happiness, it really goes to people tend to be happiest when they find something that creates a good sense of flow. And a good sense of flow is whenever you've had something you've done where you kind of lost track of time and you've enjoyed it so much, and time just seems to be a lot more enjoyable. This is a sense of flow, not that something's easy, but that it's so enjoyable that you can lose yourself in it. And people have often said, if you can find a job that you love doing, it's like you'll never work another day in your life. And this really describes that sense of flow, where when you begin to devote the time and you begin to find a flow with something, which again, sometimes that takes a sense of time where you have to move past your frustration of, I don't know that I understand this well, or I don't know that I do this well, and get to a point where you begin to maybe master something. And the last part of developing a passion is teaching yourself, actually taking the time to teach yourself and figure out what is it that, or how has God created you? What are your particular leanings, personality traits, interest? Are there things that fit you better? And things where God has kind of created you to enjoy something more simply because of your own unique personality. And after you've devoted the time, after you've worked at finding a flow for the things you've done, really finding a ways where that passion can start helping you learn more about who you are. And maybe it's you begin to develop a passion for music and you begin to pour yourself into learning an instrument, and it helps you better understand, what do you like and what do you not like? Are there styles of music that you enjoy more? And you begin to better understand yourself. 1 Corinthians 9:24 and 25 says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the game goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever." So part of why I share that is, biblically, we're told to get moving, to do something with our time. And for many of you that have a significant amount of time now, and maybe you're trying to fill that time by escaping or with entertainment, which, again, entertainment's not a bad thing. And a little bit of escape, it can be a good thing. I love a good novel that I can get into. I love a good video game. But the problem is when we don't do something in the appropriate amount, when we don't exercise the right proportion of entertainment in our life. And so when I look at this scripture, I think part of what it's challenging us to do is to do three things. First of all, to be active. I think God would want us to be active with the time we have, whether that's exercising for some, accomplishing some task, being active with our family. A little bit of sedentary is not a bad thing, but a lot of sedentary can be a horrible thing in our lives right now. And I think part of what it can encourage people to do is to dwell on those things in life right now that aren't going so well. And my sense is, in spending some time on Facebook, it's a lot of negative news. And other people are realizing that too, where they're trying to have a much more positive approach to what's going on in life right now. And so I think one thing you can do if you want to develop that passionate pursuit of distinction is to be active, to try new things. We tend to get stuck sometimes in the same routines and the same patterns, going somewhere the same way, falling into the same morning routine, evening routine, and we just don't always try new things. And sometimes it's scary. But I think if you want to learn more about yourself, if you want to develop a new passion, if you want to be an interesting person, many times that comes from trying new things in our life. I think the other thing is figuring out how to avoid time traps. It's very easy, especially when you're stuck home all day, to find time traps. Social media can be one of those. The latest season of Friends can be one of those. Any Netflix show where, if you don't get up off the couch for 5 seconds and it starts the next episode, can suck away hours of your time. Even books can sometimes be time traps. I know both me and my wife often have trouble, if we're in a good book, putting the book down and doing other things just because you just want to get to that next chapter. So figuring out what in your life has been a time trap and finding ways to avoid it. And for some people, it's something as simple as email can be a time trap, where it catches you all day long in little intervals. And sometimes the best way to avoid it is to schedule time to do those things periodically throughout the day. So the next thing is working at being distinctive. So when we look at a passionate pursuit of distinction, something that sets you apart, you can find a passion, but it can be or look a lot like other people's passions. And so what is it about you and that passion that makes it different, interesting, or notable? And so part of what I would encourage you to do is you begin to work to figure out who God has created you to be as you start trying to find some ways to develop passions in your life. I would really encourage you to find something that's going to be a unique experience. In my life, I've often found that the mission trips I've gone on or the active outdoor experiences I've done have changed me in some way, have made me into a braver person or more courageous person. And I think for me, when I look at distinctive, part of what really encouraged me in this area was the opportunity to teach for J-term. And when I first started teaching a J-term, I remember sitting down with my mentor at the time, and he'd asked me if I was interested in teaching a psychology J-term. And I said, yeah, I'd like to. I'm not really sure what I would teach it on. And he had mentioned teaching a J-term relationships class or a board game class, and because he knew I like board games. And when I thought about my love of board games, I'm like, oh, it'd be great to teach a board game class. And through teaching that class, I've since developed a much greater appreciation for board games. I've designed some board games. I've learned a lot about game theory and game design, and it really has become something where I feel like it's a distinctive part of who I am that goes beyond just playing a game casually, but I have a much deeper understanding of games and how psychology connects to games. And part of this whole area of being distinctive is when you're having a conversation with somebody and they ask you about, well, who are you? Tell me something about yourself. Can you think of something interesting to share about who you are? Not necessarily what you've done, but about who you are. And if you have trouble thinking about something interesting about who you are, I think that's the point where you need to step back and say, I need to do more things that help me feel interesting, that are interesting, and that help me to feel like I'm deepening who I am. And this is where really exploring and trying to figure out, what are the opportunities in your life where you could try something new and try something on and just see does this fit my personality? Does this fit how God has created me? A learning opportunity. And sometimes that's a relationship with a person who challenges you in some way. I know many students get this with professors where they have a chance to be in a class and debate well and bring out their knowledge or their interest or their understanding and kind of bounce it off a professor. And so I would encourage you, find something that helps you develop your sense of distinctiveness. So either something that is very different from how you are sometimes or how you think, or how you would normally act. Obviously something appropriate, but something that maybe challenges you in a deeper way to step outside your comfort zone. Something that is interesting, something where if you were sharing it with somebody else, they would find it interesting. And then when you look at notable, something where when you look back over the last year, is it something that's worthwhile to talk about? Was it something where you actually sat down and you learned a new skill that you found really interesting? So kind of to bring this all together, when you look at developing a passionate pursuit of distinction and you try to become the person that God has created you to be, one of the first things to think about is work to become a person that you want to spend time with. This talk isn't just about being more interesting, but I think it's trying to figure out how do you begin to both conform more to the image of Christ, but do it in a way where it's aligning more with the amazing person God has created you to be. And God has created each of us to be interesting and unique and different. And we gain a lot by trying to understand those differences about ourselves and about others. And one of the things we know is it does take work. If it was easy, everybody would have figured out who they are. They would know who they are and they would find things that fit who they are. But the reality is many people spend their whole lives trying to figure out who God has created them to be or who they are. We talk about an identity crisis in middle age for a lot of people. Well, part of the reason why people might have an identity crisis is they don't know who they are. They don't know who God has created them to be. And the reality is you have to work just as hard at that as you do many other things. If you want to be a master at a musical instrument or a sport, you have to pour, Malcolm Gladwell would say 10,000 hours into that. Well, if you want to better understand who you are and you want to have a really good global understanding of yourself, and you want to master your sense of self, you probably need to pour just as many hours into yourself. And that's not just spending time with yourself, but it's actually working to develop your sense of self, something about who you are. So work to become a person that you want to spend time with. The other thing is you become more attractive the more you align who you are with how God created you. And when you find that sort of flow, that area where it just works well. And I think for me, I was reminded of this when I was teaching J term, and it was a board game design and development class. Fabulous class, loved every minute of it. And the first 2 days as we were talking about game theory, we were talking about how to design games, and students were beginning to develop ideas and work on games. I felt like I was absolutely in my element. It was so enjoyable. The time just went so fast. And I was just sad that the class didn't last for 8 hours. And if you've ever had an experience like that, if you found that sense of flow in something you do, you just want to grasp onto that and just find ways to find more of that, because it's probably telling you that God has created part of you to really connect with something in that activity. I think the third thing is God has created us to work. Figuring out who we are is not something we do in a sedentary sort of manner. It's not just something that just happens. It's really something you have to work at. And for some people, this might mean you just have to pour yourself into experiences, opportunities, until you find the things that connect with who you are and those things that don't. One of the things that I learned in high school that was really self-defining for me, I took programming classes in high school. And what it taught me is I have no business being a programmer, because I would spend weeks working on a project and it wouldn't work because a decimal point was in the wrong place. And I did not enjoy that. And I've talked with people who are programmers who do enjoy that. They love the challenge of that figuring out that one little thing that doesn't work. Well, I learned that God didn't create me that way. I can be very detail oriented, but I don't want my whole entire day to be focused on those sort of details. I also took business classes in high school. I took accounting classes in high school. I took lots of classes that I wasn't sure if it was something I wanted to do, but it really helped me in exploring those areas to know, yeah, this isn't what I want to do. I took philosophy courses in college, and they were some of the best courses of my college career because it taught me how to think. And I walked into every course with the goal of, I want to stump the professor. I want to ask a question, an intelligent question that just makes Dr. Sanders go, And I only ever accomplished that twice in the entire time I had him. And it was, I knew there were great questions when he couldn't just respond with a question back to me. And it made it so fun for me. There was such a sense of flow in that for me. The last thing, you are happiest when you find a sense of flow. And when you do, others take notice. When you find something that makes you happy. And when you find something where it really is enjoyable at a deeper level, where it really connects with who God created you to be, you're happier and others begin to take notice. This is part of what makes you seem more attractive to people at that time is you genuinely have more joy in the things you do. It's why people leave really high-paying jobs sometimes for jobs that don't pay as well, because they're much happier and people enjoy being around them so much more. And so I would just encourage you as you hear this talk and maybe as you think about your own areas of passion and kind of your passionate pursuit of distinction. Are you giving yourself opportunities right now with the time you have to explore something new and interesting? Are you reading a book outside of a genre you'd normally read? Are you watching a YouTube video about a skill or something that you wouldn't have normally done? Are you finding ways to improve your skill set or your interest and allowing yourself to really explore, what's maybe a potential area of passion for you? What's something where you could pour yourself into it a little bit more and figure out if that's an area of flow for you? So I would just encourage you as you work to develop your passionate pursuit of distinction, that you really think about who God has created you to be. And part of how you sometimes figure that out is by beginning to figure out, what has God created you to do? What are the passions that God has put in your way that will help you both develop your sense of self and maybe your sense of perspective about who God is and how he created you to be. So thank you for joining me today.